Growing cover crops on your farm can be a huge game changer. They can reduce weed pressures. Cover crops can help reduce fertilizer costs. They can help reduce the impact of drought and flooding simultaneously, and they can do a lot of other things while making the farm much more profitable. However, growing cover crops can also create more problems on the farm, introduce weeds, and cost more money if they're not planned right. I'm Rob from Dowdle Family Farms, and we've grown cover crops on this part of the farm right here for 6 years, and it has been amazing transformation in terms of soil health. However, in those 6 years that we've grown cover crops, we've had a lot of successes and a lot of failures. In this video, I want to share some of our successes and some of our failures with cover crops and help you make the best decisions in choosing which cover crops are best for your farm. The first question that you should ask and answer for yourself is, what is the most important goal for growing a cover crop on one particular spot of land? Now, even though we've grown cover crops right here for several years, in other parts of the farm we've only grown cover crops for 1 year and we've got poor soils. So on this part of the farm, the soil health has improved dramatically. But if you look carefully in this cover crop field, you can see that there are a lot of weeds. There's pigweed. You can also see a lot of foxtail grasses, bristle grasses. You can see a lot of different things. Also, this is only the second growth of sorghum Sudan grass that we've grazed this year. Other parts of the farm, we've had 3 or 4 different growth cycles, and it all depends on management, which is controlled by our most important reasons for growing cover crops. I've saved several $100s an acre by grazing this cover crop with pigs. It has improved the soil health to some extent. Because we've grown cover crops here, the soil was in better shape, and I was more focused on reducing feed costs for our pigs, giving them a diverse diet, than I was on drastically improving soil health. Improving soil health was one of my goals with this cover crop, but it wasn't my primary goal. So there are a lot of different benefits that you can get from cover crops. Some people may want to increase organic matter of the soil, and having a cover crop like sorghum Sudan grass that produces a whole lot of dry matter per acre, that has a lot of root and add a lot of organic matter to the soil in just one growing season. Especially when it's grazed or mown 3 or 4 times, it dramatically increases the amount of biomass on the soil. Other cover crops help reduce fertilizers. Most people know about legumes and how they fix nitrogen. Things like clovers, soybeans, cowpeas, and those type of crops. However, we also have cover crops like buckwheat that can make phosphorus more available to other plants. Phosphorus is often contained in most soils in abundance, but it's not in a mineral form available to plants. Buckwheat has this mild acidic root exudate that helps break down the rock phosphates and make them more available to the next plants growing after the buckwheat grows. So cover crops can help make nutrients available for other plants. And a lot of row crop farmers will use cover crops to help capture excessive nutrients that are in the soil. Some cover crops help reduce weed pressure, like cereal rye. Has a type of root exudate and a plant form that helps keep pigweed from sprouting. There are other reasons for growing cover crop, but if you single out the most important issue that you want to accomplish in growing the cover crop, and then find your second and third reasons for growing the cover crop in that particular field, then you can choose your species and then manage them in such a way so that you get that benefit most productively. Let me take you to another part of the farm where we've just started growing cover crops this year. The second thing you want to consider when growing cover crops on a piece of land is, what are the long-term goals, not just for the single season that you're growing the cover crops, but ultimately for 5, 10, 15 years down the road. But my goal is to be able to graze our pigs out here on these cover crop fields. For us to be able to graze pigs on this, we need shade out here, which is why I've allowed these willows to grow to provide shade for the pigs. Even though I want to reduce feed costs long term, the first step to that is increasing organic matter to help absorb water, hold water more, and help plants grow more effectively. So my strategy here has been improving the soil structure first and increasing organic matter, rather than actually feeding the livestock. A third thing that you want to consider when choosing your cover crop species is what time of the year is it. I know that sounds very simple and very plain, but it is important. It's currently September here in Mississippi, and this time of the year we can plant our cool season cover crops if we get enough moisture. However, we can also plant other crops like buckwheat because chances are we're going to be 4 to 6, maybe 8 weeks from our first frost. So a week ago, I actually overseeded this cover crop field with buckwheat. And even though buckwheat is a warm season broadleaf plant, it is actually a great livestock feed as well. Now, I included some purple top turnips and radishes and some other stuff to go along with the cover crop that I overseeded here. And my goal with this crop, yes, it'll improve the soil health some, but my primary goal is just to offer some additional high lysine, high protein feed for our pigs, because this is right against the woods over here to my right where we have a lot of acorns falling. And in another month or so, the pigs will have some decent higher protein, higher lysine type forages available to them. The fourth thing you want to consider when growing your cover crops is what soil conditions do you have. Now right here, the soil is actually in kind of some odd shape. I'm not real sure what to do with this part of the farm. Frankly, it's flooded for most of the winter from December through March or April a lot of times. And even though it drains pretty rapidly in a couple days, there are periods of flooding, and I'm not real sure how to handle all of that. So that's why I just planted some short season cover crops right here that'll grow in another month or two that the pigs can graze before that flooding comes in. Now I did add a little bit of ryegrass and a little bit of cereal rye to this as well. Realistically, however, I don't see that the cereal rye or maybe even the ryegrass will handle a lot of that flooding this spring. We'll just have to see what happens. Now, oh my goodness, look at these turkeys over here. Sorry to interrupt this video, but this is one of the things I love about being on the farm. We just see turkeys, and they spend a lot of time around me. We're 150 yards, maybe 200 yards from them right now. They know I'm here. I just pulled up as I started recording this video, and they go on and they're walking and they're playing around for probably 15 to 20 minutes before I return to recording this video. Now, let's go back and let me show you this field and how it relates to soil conditions. Sorry, I got distracted by the dozen or so turkeys that were out there playing and horsing around. So this is what I was just showing you, where I planted the buckwheat and the brassicas and the cereal rye and maybe some ryegrass. Over here is where we've grazed some pigs. The soil here tends to get really wet. So when we get a lot of rain, even though it's a higher elevation from where we're standing right now, it'll still hold a lot of water on top of the soil, and so if you drive over it, if you walk over it, it can make a mess. The other side of the problem is that during the summer, if we get much rain, the rain does not absorb into the soil. In July, we had about 10 inches of rain in 12 days, and the water, even 5 or 6 days later, was just standing in the soil. The soil was not absorbing it at a very high rate. Increasing the organic matter in the soil can help improve the ability of the soil to not only retain water, but also for water to infiltrate the soil at a much more rapid pace. So the cover crops that I have to plant here, for now anyway, have to be able to handle short periods of flooding. The final point that I want to make is, what resources do you have to actually plant the cover crops and also to terminate them? Let's first start talking about planting the cover crops. The best way to plant a cover crop is with a no-till drill. On our size operation, we just can't justify the cost of purchasing a no-till drill, and we don't have really good drills that we can rent in this area. If you don't have access to good, reliable no-till planting equipment, you can still no-till some crops in some situations. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but like this crop right here with sorghum Sudan grass, I mowed it with a flail mower the other day. I broadcast buckwheat, dwarf Essex rape, some turnips, some other smaller seeded crops along with cereal rye, and then I've watered it in. The sorghum Sudan grass is still growing and is still alive. It'll die in the first frost, but a lot of times, especially with buckwheat, if it has soil moisture and if it has just a little bit of covering, whether it's from plant residue or dirt, it'll actually grow. And I'll put a link to this video, but this year I have actually planted a crop of buckwheat several times where we've grown the buckwheat, the pigs grazed it and knocked it to the ground, and then it regrew on its own. If you use some creative strategies, you can no-till plant some cover crop species. It's just a learning process. Other times of the year we plant with a disc. Sometimes that is our only option. In this 3-acre field that I've disked that the turkeys were in a few moments ago, I've disked the top inch or two of the soil. I have not planted anything in there yet. Last year I tried planting some clover and some ryegrass. I grazed the crop, the weeds that were there really hard, then I mowed it real low, and then I overseeded with clovers and ryegrass that supposedly sprout really well and grow really well when they're broadcast on the ground in other residue. I increased the seeding rates like I was supposed to, and essentially I just wasted my money doing that. So by disking the soil surface, I've found that that gives the cover crops a decent chance to get a good start, especially cover crops that don't grow really rapidly. The resources to manage the cover crops vary wildly. If you're in a small garden, a lawnmower or a weed eater can mow the cover crops. Some cover crops like buckwheat do not regrow really well after they're grazed. Others like sorghum sudan grass regrow rapidly after they're cut or grazed. And those are strategies that you can use. How you get a cover crop terminated is up for debate. You can use livestock, you can use the weather. I don't have a whole lot of experience because typically we either use the weather to kill the cover crops. Sometimes we graze it real hard with cows or pigs and plant something else. But if you're in a garden, you may not want something like ryegrass to grow to seed, and it may be imperative that you terminate it very quickly once it begins to bolt. That's just an option up to you, but those are just some considerations you need to know. Let me conclude this video by showing you an example of how you can save and spend a lot of money depending on what you're doing with your cover crops. I late planted a cover crop. This is the 4th growth of this sorghum sudan grass in this field right here behind me. I've had the pigs grazed it. I pulled them off of it. We've just had a lot of really good growth out of this sorghum sudan grass. Right here to my left, where the turkeys were grazing that I've disked, I planted a sorghum sudan grass there. I've gotten one good growth cycle out of it, and then after I mowed it, it came up much more thinly. I planted a BMR photosensitive period sorghum sudan grass, and I paid about $75 to $80 for a 50-pound bag of that seed. What I've observed this year, however, is that the non-specified F1 hybrid of sorghum sudan grass produces a lot more biomass if it's managed, and it has a much more vigorous growth than the variety of sorghum sudan grass that I grew this year. I'm not sure what the reason for that is, but because my primary focus was on increasing organic matter, if I had known I could have purchased the cheaper seed, it would have cost me about $20 less per acre to plant that crop, and it would have accomplished my goals much more effectively. I did not know that when I purchased the seed, and I haven't seen anyone else talk about the growth rate of these different sorghum sudan grass species. Cover crops can produce a lot of great benefits on the farm in a variety of different ways. If you begin by determining what's your most important goal for the cover crop for that year. Secondly, if you ask what are my long-term goals for this land and what am I trying to achieve in this year's growth. Third, if you consider the time of the year that you're growing, warm season, cool season, cover crops, that kind of thing. Then if you consider your soil conditions. Finally, if you consider the resources that you have to plant, manage, and terminate the cover crops, you should get much more value out of the cover crops that you're growing. If you look at all 5 of those questions, then you have the opportunity to create a cover crop that can reduce your cost, accomplish your goals, and it can be managed in a way that meets your most important resources on your farm.